These distinguished guests, everyone here, friends one and all, thank you for joining us tonight. And it really is a privilege to have all of you here. Your presence underscores the global significance of the issue we've gathered to discuss. And of course, we've got the audience in the room and the audience on the live stream, so a big welcome to both. Tonight, we've come together to address female genital mutilation, a serious form of violence against women and girls that continues to violate the rights and bodily autonomy of millions worldwide. And despite legal prohibitions and decades of interventions, this violence persists in many communities, demanding our continued attention and action. We will have the honour, the absolute honour, of hearing tonight from Domtila Chesang, the inaugural participant in the Global Institute for Women's Leadership's Changemakers program. She's our very first Changemaker. This initiative was developed in partnership with the Foundation and generously funded by the Firebird Foundation, and we thank them both. The Firebird Foundation, the Foundation, they do remarkable work on gender equality. Domtila's work is both timely and crucial. In her part of Kenya, and she'll be telling you about this, where she has conducted her groundbreaking research, FGM prevalence rates at more than double the national average of Kenya overall. Through her in-depth field work with affected communities, Domtila has illuminated the complex structures that sustain this violence. Her insights offer us a unique opportunity to understand why progress has been uneven and what approaches might prove more effective in ending FGM. We are also joined by a very distinguished panel of experts in the area. Nimco Ali, OBE, CEO and co-founder of the Foundation Global. Nimco is a passionate women's rights activist who's been at the forefront of global efforts to end FGM as a form of gender-based violence. Monica Ferro, Director of the London Office for the United Nations Population Fund. Monica will bring an invaluable perspective on international approaches to eliminating violence against women and girls. And then my very great friend, Baroness Helena Kennedy, QC, Director of the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute and member of the House of Lords. Her legal expertise is vital to understanding the frameworks needed to protect women's bodily autonomy and rights. Together, we will explore not only the specific challenges of ending FGM, but also the broader context of gender inequality and power structures that enable it to persist. So I have the very great pleasure now of firstly inviting you to watch a short film. Yes, we're a multimedia event. And then Domtila is going to take the stage and describe her work. She'll share her research findings. And I think as you listen to her, you will see that her courage, commitment, and evidence-based approach embody the kind of leadership we need to address the violence and discrimination facing women and girls worldwide. But firstly, to the film.
I was born and raised in a village called Tampalal. My community are traditionally pastoralists and practice mixed farming. My mother's land makes me feel at home. It's nature, it's bonding, it's my life all in one picture. Coming from a polygamous family, my father had 3 wives. there wasn't enough resources for everyone. I was kind of a child that wanted better. By the time I was attaining the expected age for me to be cut, which is around puberty, I was looking forward. I was so excited. FGM was still not criminalized in Kenya. It was the only pathway for girls in my community. But I witnessed one of my cousins being cut, lying helplessly in a pool of blood. I was shocked. I was traumatized because I looked at myself and I thought, this is all that I've been aspiring to have. I knew for sure that that was completely wrong. I felt like we had been lied to. So I vowed to seek for answers. But it wasn't enough to save myself. There was a need for me to save other girls who are at risk. So I became that link where girls can run to. I went back to negotiate with my boarding primary school, and thankfully they have opened their arms to provide the safety that is so much needed.
So I'm so happy to have come back today to come and see you, to come and talk to you. You have really grown.
This campaign to eradicate FGM can only be won by the people living in the communities that are affected by FGM. It requires deeply have an understanding of the community, the cultures, of the language, to create safe spaces for girls who are running away from any form of violence, risk, abuse, to enlighten the larger community.
Wow!
I have seen the power that women possess. The moment they wake up, the moment they realize they have an awareness of the power within, they are able to move mountains. I am a woman, and I am a living testament that women can do so much more than what we have been socialized to believe that we can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. My name is Domtila Chesang. Most of you, we have interacted. Some of you are seeing me for the first time tonight. And I'm so glad. Thank you for playing the film before I speak, because the film brings me closer home. So at least I feel relaxed and happy to interact with you through this report launch that we are having tonight. But before I speak onto the report, I really want to let you know who this woman standing before you tonight is. She's not just a speaker tonight. This is a woman who has committed all her life to saving girls from her community. This is a woman who has never known any other job since she left school, that is the university. This is somebody who lives and dreams saving girls from FGM and child marriage. I have never done any other job since I left the university. And since I was in the university, I was doing this job. So I wasn't brought into the space because of the Changemakers program. Changemakers gave me the most important tool that I needed at a time that was very critical, but I have lived this life, all my adult life. And why I have done this is not because I was pushed or I was coerced to do it, it's because of personal experience. From the film, you heard that I had a cousin who was cut, and you also heard me say that I was aspiring to the time I would be cut. Because as a young girl, born and bred in the village where FGM is the norm, I didn't know any other life besides FGM. I never knew there were other people outside my community. I thought it was just us. And the same story back home today. And that is why I realized that there was no need for me to graduate and be a teacher. I'm a teacher by profession, by the way. To graduate and be a teacher and be confined in a classroom when girls and women from my community were facing violence and abuse as a result of FGM. So I have done this work for over 10 years now, and I'm still doing it. I will never get tired, and I will never stop doing it because I have seen the fruits of my hard labor. I have seen girls rescued from FGM. I have girls in universities, girls in colleges, high school, and primary school who will never be cut. So there's no reason for me to stop. And thank you all for your support. The Changemakers program happened at a time just after COVID. I was very lucky to have been selected to be the first changemaker in the program, the first and the only changemaker at the time. Thank you to the Five Foundation for informing the agenda, the FGM agenda. So, and it was a time when I was facing very difficult situation. After COVID, there was a number of challenges that we encountered as frontline activists working in the community. There was a rollback of all our efforts to end FGM. Girls were cut in numbers. I was frustrated. I was sad. I was desperate for something different because it's like COVID really sort of watered down all our efforts. And I wasn't sure how I wanted to go forward. And luckily, I got into the program. And that program not only gave me the solution that I have today, but it also gave me an opportunity to step out of my village for the very first time in 10 years. For 1 month, I was in the UK. I was in London working with an incredible team at the Jewel. And that time, if you didn't realize, it was a moment for me to heal. It was a moment for me to find myself. It was a moment for me to reflect on the work that I have done over all these years. And that space that I got, that support that you give me, not only enabled me to produce this incredible report, but also it helped me to really get over my traumas and to just take a moment to breathe. Activists never get a chance to breathe. Nobody appreciates activists working in the communities. Nobody understands the struggle that we have to go through every single day. When people go home for holiday, when people take leave, we don't take leave. There's no leave. There's no holiday. That is when FGM is at its peak. So this time that you gave me was a moment for me that I will never forget. Thank you very much at the team at King's. And I'm so happy to see some of my friends here from Kenya. Thank you, Cynthia, for coming, and everyone else. So I will be sharing a report that is going to be purely speaking about my community, the Pokot community. And I know that a number of these findings will be similar to some of the other tribes in Kenya, in other parts of the continent, or even somewhere else where FGM is practiced. But this is really about the West Pokot County or the Pokot community. So, and my study was understanding the persistence of FGM, having worked in the front line every single day. I felt like there was need for me to really dig deeper and investigate, despite the laws, despite the investment, financial, time, commitment, and everything. FGM continues to persist. So when I came into the program, I vowed to do further investigation into why FGM, what holds FGM together, and that was the my study. So, and some of the key drivers that I found. First of all, FGM is not a historical tradition, but it's reinforced by contemporary social economic pressures. So the first thing that I realized when I went back into my community as a researcher, not as an activist this time, it was a moment for me to really sit back and be educated by my people. Because over the years, I was always the one in the front line talking to my people. So this time they were talking to me. That was one key highlight of my research. And I also came to realize that there's a common knowledge across the space that FGM is a historical or ancestral tradition. It is people's culture. It is people's way of life. But I came to note that FGM is mostly reinforced by contemporary social economic pressures, which I will talk about. Some of the key drivers that I found during this over 1.5 months that I was in the field full time, marriageability and dowry expectations. I know for many societies or many communities, marriage is just one of the fulfillment or one of the pathways in life for people. But for this community, for my community, it is one of the sole avenue for a girl and a woman. There's no option. It's not a choice. It's a cultural expectation. You either go through it or you go through it. There's no choice. Social acceptance and fear of stigma. This one is one of the key highlights because almost all the people that I interviewed spoke about stigma. They spoke about social acceptance. And I think I will really want to speak just very briefly about this because sometimes we make a lot of decisions about people that we have not really experienced their way of life or how they conduct their day-to-day engagements, their social lives. And we fail to realize how difficult it will be or it will be for someone who is born and lives in a village that their lives are dictated by the social expectations. It's very difficult to make a decision. You cannot say, I don't want to go through FGM. If you live in a community where FGM is the only solution or is the only practice, the norm, so you have no choice but to go through it. And stigma was mentioned very, very highly as one of the key things and the key driver that drive girls to undergo FGM, because you cannot exist. You cannot exist. You cannot live among women who have been cut. You will never conduct your life and your daily activities as usual if you haven't gone through what is expected of you. And another one was the community misconception about traditional womanhood, what the community believes in. Finally, we have limited access to education and economic alternatives. My community registers as 67% illiteracy levels. A majority of those are women. And that's why on the film, you saw me in a classroom with girls. One of my key approach is using education to end FGM, because I know what education can do. And I'm sure Cynthia, also a champion for education, is here and she agrees with me. Challenges in eradicating FGM: weak enforcement of the anti-FGM laws due to limited resources and community resistance. All this is in your booklet. You'll have a look at this in details. Social pressure and stigma discourages families from breaking the cycle. Economic dependency on dowry and driven custom. I will talk about the dowry, bride price, if you want to call it. This is one of the the key drivers in my community that sustains FGM. Like I mentioned on the film, we are a pastoralist community. Our life depends on the cattle. So the only survival mode is the more girls, the more daughters you have, the wealthier you will be. So people are so desperate to cut their girls so that they can get married. Because remember I said you cannot marry off the girl before she's cut. So FGM is a prerequisite for child marriage. And they were very bold to tell me that this is our only survival mode. What else do we do? With climate condition, with climate change affecting the communities, so girls become the only resolve for families to survive. So it was very sad and I felt very heartbroken just seeing how women have been commodified, how girls are being sold or exchanged for dowry. And for your information, in my community, I was sharing with my colleague Naima and Lisa sometimes last week, and I was telling them, they were shocked when I told them that in my community, marrying off your daughter attracts up to 30 cows. Just one girl, 30 cows, 30 goats, 7 or 8 or 10 camels. You are rich. So what will stop a family from not cutting their daughter? What will stop them? Nothing. Because they see this as lucrative business for the community. And we also have limited community engagement in policy implementation, need for grassroots involvement for lasting change. All these I've explained in detail. And just to really talk about very briefly that what I did during this study was really try to unpack. Because if you look at the existing information about FGM, why FGM exists, some of the challenges, it's just like in points form. So what I did was to go deeper. Why does marriageability promote FGM? So I have all that listed down and explained in details why bride price promotes FGM. So I have done really, really deep investigation to understand. So you will have all the details. And then moving forward, what needs to be done? Sustainable change requires collective action. I will be here today to do this presentation and to share this work of my hands, were it not for the team work that was put into this. Thanks to the support of Aleida, who worked with me hand to hand from the beginning to the very end. And of course, the collective support of the King's College and the funder and the Firebird Foundation and everybody else that was involved. So there's no way that FGM can be eradicated by one person. It needs all of us. Whether you're working in an institution like this, whether you are on social media and trying to amplify the work of activists, that is your contribution. Shift the narrative from historical justification to addressing today's realities. So this is, I struggled to explain this point. And I remember Rosie mentioned in one where I was working on the draft, like people assume this is a cultural, an ancestral practice continued from generation to generation. But when I went to my community, FGM is solely promoted by day-to-day and contemporary issues, not because it's a culture. Nobody told me that they do FGM because it is their culture. They do FGM because of stigma. They do FGM because they want the dowry. They do FGM because there's no alternative, like education. Girls are not in school. They do FGM not because it is part of their identity. So if we can all agree that we should not have that blanket belief that FGM is practiced as a cultural practice of the people, not really. We need to look at the key aspects that promote FGM or that drive FGM. So we need to shift the narrative from historical justification to addressing today's reality. And for the record, not one person was able to, and even when I was doing the literature review, there was no one proper explanation of the origin of FGM. If anybody has done a study, it's not clear. That is what research says. It's not clear. Nobody knows how FGM came to exist. So why should we base our intervention on historical justification? I hope you are all in agreement. Every stakeholder has a role to play: government, NGOs, local leaders, and communities. And finally, let's turn information into transformation. Thank you very much, and I hope you can join me on this journey.
We've worked out where we're sitting. I realised when I sat down I forgot to introduce myself at the start. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Julia Gillard and have the great pleasure of being Chair of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. Thank you so much for that presentation. Thank you for being our first Changemaker, and thank you more than anything else for all of your work over these long years, showing such courage and determination. It's just great to be here with you. I'm going to give you just a little break. I'm going to give you the last word, but a little break now. And I'm going to start with you. Baroness, Baroness Kennedy. We know that legal change is important. It's important that practices like FGM are clearly against the law. But we know from Domtila's presentation that even when laws have been changed, that doesn't, in and of itself, make all of the difference. So what more do we need to do and think about in terms of law, legal approaches? There are obviously the community approaches, but what greater role could the law be playing?
Now, I'm going to answer that question, but before I do, I want to tell Domtila something very important, because Domtila asked the question, we don't know why such cultural practices came into being. And I just want to tell you, I do know why. Because men liked to know that they were getting a virgin, and they wanted to know that nobody else had been messing around with the person for whom their family were going to be paying the dowry. And because they have this fantasy, most men, going back in time, that the tighter a vagina is, the more constricted it is, the more pleasure there might be for a man in penetrating that vagina. And so it really is to do with male notions of chastity and male notions of pleasure. And it is not pleasurable for the women. And so I think that we really do know how it came into being, and it's all about men. And we've got to turn the dial and make it much more about women. I just wanted to talk about the law then. Female genital mutilation has been criminalized in the most, the lists of laws. I'll just give you a little taste of this. The Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women specifically it deals with FGM and criminalizes it. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Istanbul Convention, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the Maputo Protocol, several UN resolutions, all of them, all of them are very specific in directly prohibiting FGM. There are other frameworks that don't directly mention FGM, but have been applied by legal committees and courts to ensure that states don't continue the practice. The UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, and Degrading Treatments or Punishments, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And yet, despite all of that law and the fact that many nations have been persuaded to introduce domestic law specifically to deal with it, and Britain has at different times visited this and revisited it, often starting off with to criminalize those who might do this, actually perform the practice here. And then it became quite apparent that what was happening was exactly as Domtila described it, people being taken to another jurisdiction where perhaps it's not criminalized in order to have the practice done. And so the British courts have, now are empowered to criminalize those who do that, who take their children abroad in order for them to be experience FGM. So the law has evolved, and in most countries in Europe, certainly, it's criminalized. But that we're receiving evidence now that actually families in Britain who are wouldn't, perhaps where they originated, or their forebears originated in Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, are now sometimes taking their children to Dubai and have the operations carried out there. And with private practitioners performing the things. Now, as a much younger lawyer, I went out to Ethiopia, and I was there with a group of women who were involved in this issue and travelled around Ethiopia. And what we found was that although Ethiopia had introduced law to prohibit the practice, it was absolutely still carrying on. And you've got to understand that this is not specific to, for example, Islam. Christians conduct this stuff as well. And so it's not specific to any particular religion. It's as Domtila said, it's a cultural practice, but unfortunately, it does huge damage to women. And I had started becoming aware of this quite a long time ago, because a friend of mine was involved in an obs and gynae department at a North London hospital. And women would arrive about to have their first baby, and then they'd be examined, and it would be found that their vagina had been stitched, that their labia might have been removed, it might be that a clitoris had been removed. It can be variable depending on how adept or how it's been done. by practitioners. And sometimes it's done just by an older woman in the community, woman to woman, and often with a razor blade in some of the rural villages. And what happened was that the doctors would say to the women, listen, it's going to be difficult for you to deliver this having been done to you. And we're telling you now that at the stage of giving birth, you're likely to you'll need to be cut open a bit to let the baby come out. And I am telling you now that I'm not allowed in law in Britain to in any way return you to how your vagina has been. I can stitch any tear, but I cannot return your vagina to the state that it currently is in. And the women would cry. Their husbands would get very angry and want to persuade, because they often would attend with them and would say that they wanted the doctor to sew their wives up again. And often it would have to be an argument about what was lawful and what wasn't. 2 years later, the woman would return to the obs and gynae clinic at the hospital, and her vagina would no longer be looking the way it was after the baby was born, because they had already been stitched up again. And so this was becoming a serious issue. I mean, I'm talking about now 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago. But it seemed very important. And I mean, I just want to talk about this woman and the change that she has made in this, because it became very important that this became an issue that was taken up by women in the communities where the practice continued. And I want to just mention one case before we move on to other speakers. In my own chambers, there was a case that was conducted, and it was a case of Fornah, Fornah. And it was a young girl. The action was being taken to ask for asylum on her behalf. She was 11 and just prepubescent. And her mother was returning to Sierra Leone and wanted to take her with her. And the child did not want to go and said she did not want to go because she did not want to be cut. And her aunt was very supportive of her in this. And they'd been staying with this aunt in London, also a Sierra Leonean born woman. And she did not want to be returned to experience the business of FGM. And so an application was made, the aunt supporting the girl, that she be allowed to remain and be granted asylum in Britain. And it went through the lower courts, and the shocking bit for me came when it was in the Court of Appeal, because it was a court which had 2 men and 1 woman. And that was quite rare. Our courts at that time, this was about 2012, had very few women in the higher echelons, and there's still very few, let me tell you. But this bit of information is really important, because it tells you why it's so important to have women in every strand of our societies and at every level. Because there were 2 men and 1 woman, and the 2 men basically, by a majority, made a decision that she should not be granted asylum, because it was an accepted practice in Sierra Leone and supported by the women of Sierra Leone, and therefore it was a cultural practice, and it was not, for Britain to be interfering with that. This was not a basis for asylum, because it was not about persecution. It was accepted. It was not because a minority were being persecuted. And it was Mary Arden was the 1 woman judge, and Mary Arden did a minority opinion on it, and she really objected to this business, that it was the culture of Sierra Leone, which the 2 men had insisted upon. And she said, who determines the hegemony that produces cultures? Who is setting the business of what the culture is? And it was not women. And she pointed out whose interest it might be that such a thing as stitching up somebody's vagina and removing labia and possibly the clitoris. When I was in Ethiopia, I distinctly remember that being said to us by people who supported the practice that it made women much nicer, that it made them much calmer people, that they became much more passive and quiet. Think how nice we would be if we'd had this done to us. Anyway, all I can tell you is the idea was that it improved women's personalities, that it made them sort of more gentle souls. And if you wanted the right kind of wife, this was a good thing to do. So all I can tell you is that it went to the Supreme Court. It was before our Supreme Court existed. It was the highest judicial committee in the House of Lords. And fortunately, we by that time had one woman on that court, and she argued the toss. It was Brenda Hale, and she not only took up the argument that Mary had presented as a minority opinion, but she actually got Tom Bingham, the president of the court, to absolutely make the decision and to run the argument through all of them that this was not a practice that should be allowed and that the child should be granted asylum in this country. So I just want you to know it's a hard business, but we have to now continue to make the argument. And there are many, many women from minority communities where this practice still goes on who are becoming advocates, and the chief amongst them is the woman to my left.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all that information and insight, and for a very great segue. So, Nimco, thank you to you. We wouldn't be here without you and the Five Foundation. We're very grateful for that, and we're very grateful for the way you and the Five Foundation have been at the forefront of FGM advocacy globally. From your experience, can you tell us what you've seen that's most effective to bring change?
Thank you very much for having me here today, and congratulations, Domtila. I'm incredibly proud, and it's been a privilege to work with you over the last decade and see how far you've come. Ultimately, the real crux to change is funding grassroots leaders, is funding grassroots activism, and that is what is at the core of the Five Foundation. We're not a practitioner organization, we're a grassroots funding organization that advocates for more funding to grassroots women. So it's women like Domtila, it's women like Jaha Doucouré, who's from the Gambia, who this year had to fight again in order to keep a legislation that would ban FGM. So the reality is that the patriarchy and those who want to FGM to carry on are powerful, they're well funded, but solemn are the women who are the forefront, who are doing these and doing this work. So principally, in order to end FGM, we have to invest in African women. We have to invest on women who are at the grassroots level. And each and every one of those women and each and every one of those countries has different things that end FGM. So as Domtila was saying, it's education that's ending FGM within a community. Others have pointed to economic independence, and it's about funding women, and it's about funding in ensuring women that have an independent access to money in order for them to make decisions, decide when they marry, who they marry, how many kids they have, and how they raise those kids. I think the economic independence of women is very solemn thought about within the African kind of context. Africa needs economic development. I think that's one of the key kind of things that has kind of allowed women on the continent of Africa to become the commodity. As Domtila has talked about, men are exchanging women for cattle, and that's what women have become. Africa's biggest commodity are women. If you want to buy a house, women are the bride price. If you want to buy land, women are what's exchanged. And interesting enough, FGM, even though at the massive kind of community and outside the community and at the national level, is a detriment to the existence of that society, at a community level, FGM is actually an added benefit. So if you cut your daughter, she's worth more cattle. But if you look at the GDP of a country, it's costing them environmentally and also health-wise around $2 billion a year. So if we're going to talk about things like ending poverty doesn't happen in a vacuum. It ultimately starts with ending something like FGM. If a country like Kenya could save $2 billion a year by not spending that on the health consequence of FGM, how much richer could Kenya be? How much more money could Kenya contribute to education, to all those things? So, and another thing is allowing women to control their bodies, so access to contraception, access to reproductive health rights. So as complex as the issue of ending FGM is, the really key angle of that is investing in grassroots women's work. And we are, so one of the key things that the Five Foundation does is that we don't scatter funds, we focus at a certain country. So at the moment we're focusing on Kenya. And outside of that focus comes a resource bank that we're about to build. So each and every one of you in this room right now, as voters, as funders, can look at this resource bank and say, what is working to end FGM? Because one of the really depressing things is that people have come to the issue of FGM, as graphic and as horrible as it is, want to end it, but then they think that they have the answer. The answer is actually there, and we're going to try to collate that in a resource bank. So I think to go in a roundabout way, it's investing in women like Domtila. It's about the Jahats. It's about all these kind of incredible women. And I want to say thank you to Helena, because I think the case that she talks about was fundamental to a lot of the work that we did here in the UK. For almost, well, I was like, I grew up here. I'm like, I lived in the UK without having FGM, and then I came back having FGM. And then I, for almost 20 years, lived behind the cultural cul-de-sac of consistently being my rights as an African woman, but as a British woman, were actually succeeded by the rights of so-called communities. So my rights to be protected from all the things that FGM contributes to, principally torture, was seen through the lens of culture. So it was like, do we protect you or do we respect the community? And I think it was Helena when I was in law school and her book of Framing Eve, which actually said that the law is sometimes gendered. The law doesn't actually really look at the rights of women. That really meant that for almost a decade, we ended up pushing towards trying to get FGM to be seen as a form of violence against women and girls. And one of the things that I really want to say is that as we get more culturally sensitive, as we kind of integrate, let's not go back into those ways where girls in this country are actually treated just because of their skin tone or just because of their communities that they come to as ones that are not respected by the law of this land. So again, thank you very much for all you did without necessarily knowing that it was empowering and driving girls like me that were behind community walls to understand that the law really did see us as well.
Thank you so much. Monica, I'm going to turn to you for your UN perspective about the work that the UN's been doing and what you've seen works for change.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the invitation. I want to thank you for the invitation and say just how honored I am to be joining this panel and meeting you, and looking forward to reading your reports. When I entered the building, I entered with a colleague, and we were just saying, how in these days we're all affected by, the dire news about cuts to ODA, about shattering multilateralism. I think that some of us are not losing hope, but our hope is sort of on pause. So panels like this and gatherings like this are also very important, so that we can re-energize ourselves and leave this room with the sense that we can achieve something. Precisely what you said, Domtila. You see what works. So if we can leave this room a bit more informed of what works, I think it will be worth it to be here. So from the UN perspective, so I work for the United Nations Population Fund, and we manage with UNICEF the joint program to end child marriage and the joint program to end female genital mutilation. And the program to end female genital mutilation has been ongoing since 2008, and it's challenging to find a simple word. It's very challenging for all the reasons you've heard. Also, when it comes to culture, we often face, in conversations, people tell us, well, but it's social norms, it's culture, and I always say the same thing. It's not culture, it's a human rights violation. We've heard it. It's a violation of human rights, on the right to life, on the right to health, mental and physical health. It's a violation of the right to live free from torture. So it's a whole set of violations that the UN has been very clear in putting it in international treaties, Human Rights Council resolutions. So it's really understood the dimension of the human rights violation. Then why is it so hard to change? Because we are talking about social norms. We are talking about harmful practices, but they come with a sort of a coercion, right? And when we work with community leaders, we are often told, well, but it's culture, it's social norms. And I always say the same: social norms are constructed; they can be deconstructed, especially if we provide them with strong arguments like the ones we've heard now. It hurts women, it damages their societies, it even impacts. As Nimco was saying, it even impacts the wealth of the country. So there's absolutely no good reason. If we're still wondering if there was a good reason to continue, there's no good reason. So why? What we've been trying to do is we've been trying to set up a set of conversations, a set of good practices that can lead the path forward. You know the numbers. You know that today, alive, we have about 230 million women and girls who've undergone female genital mutilation. If we don't step up the progress, until 2030, we will have 27 additional women and girls undergoing FGM. Per year, it's about 2 million girls who undergo FGM before their 5th birthday. So this is what we are talking about, and this is what's not acceptable. So we try legislation. It's not enough. It works. It's important, but it's not enough. Julie, can I just say something about my previous life? So before joining the UN, I'm Portuguese. I was an MP. And one of the things that I did while I was in Parliament is I helped to co-draft the law criminalising FGM. And a lot of people are telling us, but why do we need it? We already have a law that bans FGM by calling it an offence to your physical integrity. But the problem is that we had girls who have undergone FGM. They were taken to see a doctor, and the doctor provided all sorts of considerations about the impact of the cuts, saying that it didn't, I'm going to quote a judge, it didn't affect the fruition of the organ. I wonder what the person thought the organ was for, but I'm quoting. So we thought, no, let's do a law, let's make it clear. There's no interpretation. FGM is always a crime. So, but it's not enough, because then we need budgets. We need a budget so that the law can be rolled out, so that the law can be implemented. We need training for professors, teachers. We need training, in Portuguese is the same word. We need training for teachers. We need training for judges. We need training for health workers. One of the trends that we are seeing that scares us a lot is the medicalization of FGM. As it was mentioned, you take the girls to a place where they can be done in a private hospital or a public hospital, but it can be done by doctors, by medical professionals, and it's sort of like, it's okay. It's not okay. It's still a human rights violation. And the other thing that we also see is, and I left the last bit, the most important one, it's working with grassroots organizations. That's really what works. It's by allowing survivors to take the center of all the planning that it's been done. It's giving them the space so they can also, we can hear their voices. We can fully empower them so they can fulfill their agency, because they know what needs to be done. They know what needs to happen so that we can end FGM. So what's working is what we call the community dialogues with parents, religious leaders, and also involving health workers and health education, media and social marketing that changes social norms. We go again to the change, the deep change that has to happen, so that this is no longer perceived as a cultural practice or something that can be qualified in any way. But it's also very important that we add that all these interventions, they need to be nuanced, they need to be respectful, and they need to be also cultural sensitive and led by champions. And this is why we are very proud to work with the Five Foundation, with NIMCO. NIMCO challenged us at the FGM program, so that we can serve as a pipe, as a vehicle to fund grassroots organizations in Kenya, because the UN brings this added value. It's accountable, it's transparent. We are very used to show the impact of our work. And so we are working. First, we were told it was not possible, but then we made it possible. So we are very proud to work. Can we say the donor? Yeah, it's NORAD who's giving the joint program the funds, and it's being channeled to 5 grassroots organizations in Kenya, because some of these grassroots organizations, they need extra support. They need training. In order to fit the criteria to get the grant, they need to have accounting systems. Sometimes it's very complicated for very organic grassroots organizations. This is where the UN steps in by coming up with creative solutions that are at the same time accountable and very impactful. And this is the message that I wanted to leave with you. It's the UN serves this purpose of both working on the normative but also on the implementation. And this we often say it takes a village. It takes the whole world to end FGM, and I think that this is one of the pathways that's been proven to be the most effective, giving voice to survivors, letting them lead the process. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Very good. I'm going to just swing back very quickly to each of you and then come to Domtila. We've obviously had big disruptions to our world and to the system of aid and development. The COVID pandemic obviously stopped a lot of work that was happening in countries in the field, and now we've got very major around the world cuts to official development assistance to aid funding by countries, most spectacularly in the US, but not just confined to the US. So reflecting on either or both, I mean, what has the impact been on change programs of those kind of disruptions?
When the COVID pandemic was declared, I think most of you will remember it was March. So in April, we had already published a paper calling governments, communities to take a gender lens to their work. We said very clearly, women are going to be more severely impacted than men. And we raised the alarm on unwanted pregnancies, STIs, domestic violence, and harmful practices such as FGM and child marriage, because we knew that, first of all, we couldn't carry out the programs that we were doing with communities and with governments, but we also knew that in some countries, some parents would resort, schools were closed, there was very little hope in the future, so we knew that some parents may resort to child marriage, and child marriage, as we've heard, often implies FGM. So we knew that would happen. So we asked governments, please put this lens when you are programming both the response and also the funding for the crisis. And this was very hard. Some countries were more impacted than others, which meant that the programs were more rooted in the communities than others. But the adaptation was mainly try to work with the health system, work with community leaders, with traditional leaders, because we know there's the power, bringing men and boys to the conversation too. It's a very important force for change. And so that was very challenging, and unfortunately we were right. The numbers rose, and the perspective is that we are still seeing the impact of the delay in the implementation of the programs. Now with the cuts, it's a different challenge, not only because the cuts have been severe. You've all heard it. It's impacting again women and girls more dramatically than the rest of the programs, because it's impacting a whole set of sexual reproductive health and rights programs, maternal health, and you also saw, and now I'm going to be very provocative. You also saw that the attack, it's not only on funding, it's on multilateralism, it's on the word gender. We know that we have algorithms who are going through websites just looking for the word diversity, looking for the word gender, looking for the word transformative. And those programs are all being severely impacted. And for us and for the rest of the United Nations, it's not only about funding, it's about a whole process that's been in place with lessons to be learned. There's no doubt about it. That's a conversation that we can have, not while the countries are stealing the oxygen from these countries, because shutting down a clinic without having time to adapt won't resolve any issue that the UN has on delivering aid. It just creates more chaos. It's creating a lot of anxiety, and I'm sorry, people are dying. This is precisely what's happening. Yeah.
I was going to come to this
Yeah.
end of
Yeah.
the panel on the same issue. So
Yeah, I was gonna add to that, because I think, like, as horrific as the cuts have been, I think we have to separate the difference between the ideological cuts and the cuts that are fiscal. So even though the UK cuts have been deep and painful, but that's been a fiscal decision which we don't agree with. I think there's ways to always support the poor, but I think the ideological cuts are specifically more harmful. The cuts to US aid wasn't because that US aid didn't have any money. It was because of the fact that they were going against the principles of multilateral, about gender and equality. And I think those are the different ways that we need to, like, to differentiate our advocacy. I think we can have conversations with the government in the UK and find philanthropy from somewhere else. But the thing about the US is that we have to start having conversations with these people who are being told that DEI is wrong, these people that are being told that funding African women is wrong. It's about conversation. So I think the advocacy and the way that we need to work towards, like, addressing the cuts have to be different. And I think that's where, like, showing the work that Domtila does and really advocating for grassroots activism is really key. As hard as it is going to be, I don't think all hope is lost, because I think we can fill the gaps with philanthropy within the UK. I think the real fight has to be, we can't let these ideological cuts really take root, and we can't spend the next 4 years thinking that something different is going to come. I think that fight back has to start now, and sadly that fight back has to start by showing these people that the cuts that they're making are making to women and girls who could be them. So I think that's the difference that we have to make in terms of when we talk about the cuts to international development aid. Some of them are being done spitefully, and some of them are being done fiscally, which is both harmful but completely different in terms of the way that they come.
It's always great hearing you talk, because there is a bigger picture in all of this. And I just want you all to know that, I mean, that business of algorithms seeking out words, which are the sort of cue words, which they think indicate terrible things like feminism, or indicate that women want equality, or that you want to end discrimination, or that you want to be inclusive, and so on. And we know, because it was published in the New York Times a week or so ago, the words which are now, I mean, the prohibited words, and there was a whole list of them. It included social justice, it included community. I mean, words that they think trigger. That those bloody lefties are up to no damn good, or those feminists, or those people that want want to change the world in ways that will diminish our profits. Anyway, all I'm saying to you is that that whole business it came home very clearly to me, where on International Women's Day, I was invited to speak by some young women who had done their research and thought that I might be a useful person to come and speak to their corporate world. And so off I went, full of my usual kind of, stuff about why the world has improved when we all work together, men and women are and all that. And all I can tell you is that as I arrived through the door, the young women came very sort of shamefaced to me and said to me, we've had the bosses have said that we have to tell you that they don't want you to talk about DEI. Oh, I went, what? I said, this is International Women's Day. I mean, have they noticed that what I'm coming here to discuss? And I said, listen, you you've told me, and I'm grateful and thank you. And I will talk in the way that I would anyway. And I said, and after you've got to say, she just ignored what we told her, and there was nothing we could do. I've spent my life being that woman who hasn't listened to those constraints, and you must all be the same as well. We have to basically resist this business that we can't continue to talk about how the world has improved when men and women come together to end horrible practices, to end discrimination, to end impoverishment. We just mustn't allow this kind of chilling effect just to descend upon us. I really feel that it's so strongly. Anyway.
Can I just say, we didn't delete any of these words from our website.
Yeah.
It's the price to pay now.
I'm going to come back now to you and to your research and your work. And I think one thing that stands out from your presentation tonight, from the film, from my interactions with you as you've been in this process, is you're always full of energy and full of hope. And so, you know, looking at the future, what keeps you motivated and energised for someone who's been at this task since they were a schoolgirl themselves?
Well, it's not like I have a choice. I have, I have no choice. I have to be strong as a big sister, as a woman who has dedicated her life to create change in her community and to be the change that she wants to see. I have no choice. I have to be strong. And what keeps me going, really, and I think it's important that we all acknowledge that there's change happening at the grassroots level. Kenya moved from 21% FGM prevalence in 2014 to 15% prevalence in 2022, according to KDHS. And I want to mention that this is the work of grassroots activists who work tirelessly hard, who do the donkey job with completely limited funding, sometimes without funding. And that is why I really want to highlight that the way we expect communities to change, even our strategies at the global platforms, at the key decision-making table should also change. We should not continue to reinforce practice that never worked. If things never worked 20 years ago, we should not continue to use the same strategies, because we cannot put pressure on communities to change when we are not changing our funding models, when we are not relooking into the policies and the law that exist. Because one of the key factors that I investigated was the law, the effectiveness of the anti-FGM law. We have an FGM law in Kenya. It's the Prohibition of FGM Act 2011. And despite this law, and despite Kenya having so many beautiful laws, FGM continue to persist. For example, in my community, with a 44%, double, even more than 2 times the national prevalence. And this is just the overall statistics. But in many parts of my own community, there are places where FGM records up to 100%. So we should really be able to think and to ask ourselves questions like, if our efforts have not given us any impact or any achievement, why should we continue to do the same things the same way? You know? So, and this is what I always use. I always say, well, when I was young, people came to our villages, our communities, and they told us about FGM. And that is how I was rescued. That's how I was saved. But today, we should be able to acknowledge that there are people from those communities that should not be told what to do. They know what works for their communities. It's completely wrong and morally wrong to go to people's communities and tell them what to do about FGM. Change on FGM can only be led successfully and sustainably by the communities where FGM happens. So, and that is why I really appreciate the fact that we are so far being able to bring women from these communities to tables like this to talk about their own issues. Because long gone are the days when we used to speak on behalf of other people. It's about time we allow people to speak, to give us their stories. That way we'll be able to get the facts about FGM. And that is what this book entails. If you get a chance to look at this, it's really talking about the issues that have been ignored over time. Because I realized that we've all been following manuals that have been produced by other people. And when I sat down to think about it, I was like, wait a minute. I began this work and I have sometimes made reference to existing information on paper, but who conducted this data? Who wrote these books? How much information is actually truthful on the books? And when I went now to conduct my my study, I realized our communities have completely been misrepresented, and it's just been mentioned like really shallow, very shallow information about communities. So one of the key things that needs to be done is, I believe, and I request on this platform today, that let us allow other grassroots women in IMCO to be able to conduct their own studies. If we can, please let's give them the power that they deserve. That way they'll be able to have their own guides that will be able to inform their interventions in their own communities.
Just to come back on what Domtila said, because we understand the resource nature of actually bringing one grassroots leader to the UK and to be able to do that. So this is why the Children Investment Fund Foundation, SIF, has funded this resource hub. So we are working with grassroots activists in order to tell us what works. So therefore, people that want to be able to help end FGM can actually support these women directly. So we are doing that because this has to be evidence-based. It can't be, we want to end FGM, so let's try, which has been happening for the last 30 years. It has to be evidence-led, and Domtila's work is going to serve for Pokot, but there are going to be other women that are going to be able to share their research on this resource hub as well.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Domtila, I'm really interested to know, how does one win over the men in the communities to see, aren't they persuaded when they see, I mean, so often things can work when you persuade men about their daughters, and that do you want something to happen to your daughter, which could mean that when she has babies, that there might be the baby might not survive, or she herself might not survive because of the fact that she's undergone FGM. That there's a higher risk. I mean, does that work with men? What works to persuade men to come on side? Because inevitably we need to do it across the whole piece.
For sure, yeah. First of all, I don't think there's any divide in this intervention whereby we are not saying we are only handling or we are only addressing FGM from the women's perspective. What we do at the community level is holistic intervention. Everybody is involved, the fathers, mothers, because FGM is also a collective responsibility. It is not a one-person decision. And shock on you, women who have undergone FGM are the key drivers of FGM as well. They are the ones who stigmatize other women who have not gone through FGM. So just having that knowledge that FGM is a collective responsibility, but at the same time, remember in these communities, parents, not even just the men, people do not believe that the effects of FGM actually happens to their daughters as a result of FGM. They do not link up the consequences of FGM with FGM. So what needs to be done is education. People need to be taken through the process. And that's why I'm saying, and that way, that can only be done by people who speak the language, who understand the culture, the sensitivity of the cultures. Because when I speak in my community, I speak my language. I speak from a point of knowledge, and experience. And for men, I know what men will want to hear. So you cannot just go in there and tell them, FGM. And by the way, this you'll read in the report. The community did not one person acknowledge the health effects of FGM as a result of FGM. So if you are still using the health implications of FGM to drive the anti-FGM campaigns, then you're missing the point. Of course, we all know that FGM is harmful to the health, physical, psychological health of a woman. But how are you going to frame your intervention, your approach? Because they don't acknowledge. They completely, and their argument was that, wait, before hospitals came to our villages, we used to do FGM. Not one woman ever had the consequences of FGM. So having those understanding, those small bits of information are very critical, very important. And the only way you can be able to handle the men is, first of all, having an understanding of that community. What is the position of men? Like in my case, the men are, in one of the themes that I mentioned, the role of men. Men are the ones who play a critical role in perpetuating FGM, facilitating the process of FGM. They're the ones who pay the cutters. They're the ones who allow FGM to happen in their homesteads. They're the ones who actually sort of like give the permission for FGM to happen. FGM cannot happen if the father is against it. It cannot happen. In the community context, it cannot happen. Even if the mother does everything possible and the father has not put their signature on it, not like literal signature, but signature, it will not happen. So having that understanding will be able to help you, or to help us to know, okay, how then do I approach this man? Do I approach this man from the point of health implications? Or is there another strategy to get to the man? For example, in this case, the obsession is about the dowry. Fathers want dowry. Brothers want dowry because they also want to use the same. I'm using dowry, but I know it's a bride price, to use the same bride price to marry their wives. So there's a serious obsession about the bride price among the men in my community. And that way, and I'm telling you for sure without any fear of contradiction, that you can be killed if you dare to stand on the way of the dowry or the bride price. And even you as a girl, your life ends, like your relationship with your family ends at the bride price exchange table. Once they receive their bride price, you are done. Whatever your husband does with you, that is his business. Because for them, that is the end of it. And it's really very heartbreaking. Everything I learned about the girls, and the fact that some of them even try to refuse, to rebel, to be married off, but their parents will beat them up. You are beaten by your own family. You are beaten by the in-laws. So the girls have no choice. They just have to get on with it.
Okay, we're running a little behind time. We're just going to take a couple of questions. So I'll take one from each side. We've got one here, and if there's a question over here, one there, and we'll take two. We'll take you two. So we've got three. If you can pass the mic forward, okay, and then we'll go over there.
Hello, Domtila, thank you so much. I need to be your pupil. Okay, thank you very much for everything you do. I just have a couple of comments. The first one concerns the UK government. And that is, they've made some commitments leading up to 2030, and possibly, Nimco, you can answer that. And I don't know how they're going to fulfill their obligations for SDG 5, which they've committed to. So that's one thing. And secondly, my second comment is around funding. And I just wondered why people find it very difficult to fund organizations and grassroots organizations in particular that are run by Black women. It says a lot about the trust that they put in the communities that would actually end the practice. I just give you an example. I went to Sierra Leone. I'm from Sierra Leone. I went to Sierra Leone last month, and well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to say what I want to say because we don't live very far from the president, and it doesn't really matter. You could come and rescue me, Helena. Yes. So when we went, the UK government and other governments give money to the Sierra Leone government and other African countries where FGM is practiced. And I'm not sure that they use that money. For example, Sierra Leone is going through trying to pass a law to ban FGM. They can pass the law, but they do not implement it. So I am appealing to you in particular that if the British government is going to give funding to countries around FGM, they shouldn't give it in money. They should give it in expertise to help people understand how to implement laws. But the money that the government has need to go to the grassroots, because if you evaluate and look at what's been happening, it's not because of the governments themselves. It is about the local women, the grassroots that are really going out of their way. Some of them get killed, some of them get injured to take the messages to women. Thank you very much. Thanks, Nimco.
Okay. If you can pass the microphone forward, if you could we'll get the question here, and then we're going to come back to the back.
My name's Hilary Burridge. I wrote the textbook Eradicating FGM in 2015, so I kind of got a bit of history in this. What I wanted to say is this. Domtila may remember you were in my first book. Yes, female mutilation. And one of the other contributors to that book was Morizanda Kuyate, who was the leader of the international, Morizanda, whom I know, just as I know Domtila, of course, tackled me on the subject of culture, right? And it's absolutely right. He said, stop calling it culture. Culture people like to keep. Call it tradition or history. You could ditch tradition and history. I mean, I could say much, much, much more about this, but I'm not going to. But I think Morizanda is right. And I would totally go along with all the things being said. By the way, I am not paid at all for my job, so I'm not making any kind of appeal. But yeah, we've got to get the men involved. I would be very happy to talk to anybody here about how, because plenty of ideas. But Morizanda needs to be heard on that. It ain't culture, it's tradition.
Thank you. And just back here.
All right, thank you so much. Unfortunately, the men are not speaking. And that explains the biasness we have in fighting FGM. One of the speakers have mentioned that men are actually left out from this. And I thank Domtila for mentioning that she's trying to bring men to the table. And we all agree that it is the role of men, or it's men who are actually perpetuating FGM in the society. But the big question is, how much are we putting to ensure that men stop the vice? Because once um, once we continue empowering women, and men don't know what the women are being taught. On the other hand, as a person who have worked in the similar field for a while, they will end up not accepting what women come up with, especially in the African setting and specifically where I come from. Like, if my wife comes and tells me, like, we are not going to, maybe my daughter is not going to undergo circumcision, then she has no role to play. But if you bring me on board and say, hey, this is the vice, then I'm likely to change. So the big question is, how do we ensure that we pull more men to these tables than we have for the women? Because we all have a common understanding that it is the role of men. It is no longer the women. Thank you.
Okay, what I'm going to do is, we are running very behind now. I'm just going to get any one sentence responses from panel members. I'll get Domtila to go last. So to any question.
I think I'll answer Janet's question. It is true that whereas not the UK government, but FCDO's like hands are tied to a certain extent. So I think they can provide the expertise, and that's why we're getting funding from private organizations, because that way it's unlimited and we can kind of use that in a way which is helpful to women. So I do agree with the cuts specifically now, that they don't need to give any more money to FGM, but they can give their practicalities, and then we can find funding from somewhere else.
I think that the business of we also should be challenging the business of the money not going into the hands of the FCDO, the high commissions and the embassies, and then they decide that we're having a party next week, so we're not going to spend the money on. I really think that you have to get it straight to the grassroots, and it must be possible to do that. And they should be negotiating with you and with others who are involved in organisations that are working at the grassroots. And Domtila tells us how effective that is, and it is about. I'll get David Lammy to call you. I'm so influential. No.
Maybe a word that captures everything, or we are talking about transformation, right? So we need sustainable funding, because none of this will happen without sustainable funding. And maybe we need to find a bit more creative ways to make sure the funding gets to the grassroots organizations, like the partnership we just did, where we are just a vehicle, and it's fine. Because the challenge with getting money to grassroots organizations is that most of the donors attach so much caveats, so many rules to the funding, that you actually need something like something that's in place already that can serve as that channel. And about bringing men and boys to the conversation, it's been the theme of many projects, because social transformation needs to happen within the community. And I had a very interesting example of a young boy telling us that he was the one who told his mother, I will not marry a woman who's undergone female genital mutilation. And that mother challenged him, because she had gone through the practice. And in the end, she was left with two options: either not marrying the son, or allowing the son to marry who he wanted to marry. And in the end, the son won. So it's about transformation. It's about allowing all these voices. But again, as Domtila was saying, this requires that the person leading the process is from a grassroots organization, a survivor.
I agree. Yeah. Final word to you.
Thank you. I kind of really agree that men are already involved, and I do not want to lead a campaign that is rallying men to end FGM, because men should take responsibility. Men have ears, men have been to school, men occupy very key positions in the world. So men are already in spaces where they need to effect change. I should not stop taking girls to school to start rallying men to take part in ending FGM. Men are the presidents of our countries. Men are the lawmakers of our countries. Why should we start to talk about bringing men on the table? They're already on the table. They are sitting on the table, they're very influential positions. Men should just take action. They should stop sitting back and watching and take action. So, and finally, I think I will not tire to say that education, economic empowerment. will enable us to eradicate FGM. If we can invest in grassroots organizations, grassroots women like myself, working 24/7 to bring FGM to an end, we should be able to support those women, to be able to bring girls to school, to be able to empower women economically. That way, FGM will be eradicated. Thank you very much.
We're going to draw the event to an end now, but I do want you to join me in doing a few thank yous, which is going to require you to turn your heads around because in the back, Rosie Campbell, there's no need to turn your head around because I'm pointing at you. And I'm pointing most assuredly at Aleda, who is standing. So, Rosie, can you stand up, please, Rosie? Okay. And you are applauding Rosie and most particularly Aleda because the Changemakers program started when Rosie was the director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, and she played a major role in getting it off the ground. But the whole thing would not have worked, and I'm sure Domtila would agree with me on this, the whole thing would not have worked without Aleda's efforts to make it work. So huge thank you to Aleda. And once again, if you can turn your heads that way, Sophia in the back there. Thank you, Sophia, for organising tonight's event. Can I ask you firstly to join me in thanking our three panellists? Thank you so much for your contributions. But most of all, a huge thank you to Domtila. Thank you so much. And please feel free to join us for some refreshments. Thank you.